Hello everyone and welcome back to Win Games for another tutorial on DOTS 1.0 experimental. In today's episode we will learn about the bakers and baking system that allows to transform our game object into entities. This new baking workflow replaces the conversion workflow that was used until Entities version 0.51. We will see the principles are similar, but the implementation has some key differences. Let's start with the authoring component and the bakers. To be able to author our data on our game objects, we need to define a mono behavior. So, in the project window, under Scripts, create a subfolder called Authoring and a mono behavior C# script. Call it what you want. I will call mine enemy and open it in your code editor. This component will just contain the data that need to be exposed in the editor. So to control our entities, we need to define the speed, a simple float, and a list of transforms that will form the path to follow. And that's it for the authoring component. We now need to make a baker that will define how to process that authoring component and make ECS components out of it. In the same file below your mono behavior, or in another file, it does not matter, create a new class that extends the baker class and specifies the authoring component type as the generic parameter of the baker. Implement the override, and in that method add your ECS component starting with the speed. To set the ECS component value, retrieve it from the authoring data. Next, the next path index that does not need to have any information from the authoring component. And last, the waypoints dynamic buffer that will be populated with the transform position registered in the authoring component. Finally, we can add the guard clause to make sure we have waypoints before adding any related ECS components. Now we can go back to the Unity editor. In your subscene, create 4 empty and place them in the scene. On the cubes, add your authoring components and set the speed and waypoints. You can set them one at a time or lock the inspector to set them all at once. Don't forget to unlock the inspector afterwards, or you won't be able to edit the other cube. I'll invert the second cube's waypoints to make it move in the opposite direction. Now, if we enter play mode, you will see your cube move. Great, now we have our cube follow the path we defined in a convenient way in the scene. But if we look at our converted scene, you will notice that we have 4 entities that are our waypoints. Their existence is just a waste of memory. Their position has already been set in the dynamic buffer of each cube. We can tell that these game objects are there only for baking by using the baking only entity authoring component. Now the waypoints entity are no longer in our converted scene. But our cubes still behave as expected. Great, you already have the basics to start building some cool games. Before learning about the baking system, if you like this video so far, hit the like button and share it with your friends and colleagues. It helps a lot seeing that the content is appreciated, so thank you. Now, the baking system. If you use the entities package in its previous versions, you might think that the baking system has the same purpose as the baker. Like the conversion system has the same function as the iConvert entity interface. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry. All you need to understand is that the baking system is not a substitute to the bakers. It acts as a complement, not a replacement. If we think about the baking workflow, we basically have 3 worlds. The authoring world, the baking world, and the runtime world. The authoring world consists of our mono behavior components. We could have one that have ingredients and another one that have a cooking instruction. Then we have the bakers. They will take the authoring component and bake their data into ECS components. On some cases, they can make something more optimized for runtime, like transform the ingredients into cake dough, or a list of transforms into a dynamic buffer of points. And sometimes it doesn't have that capability and will just make an ECS component that matches one-to-one and put them in the baking world. Then the baking system comes into play and will take the entities from the baking world and turn them into entities in the runtime world, like our oven make a cake out of some dough and cooking instructions. The baking system does not have access to the authoring component, so we sometimes have to make an ECS component type just for the purpose of baking. There is no guarantee on the execution order of the bakers, but they will always all run before any baking system. One last information before seeing a concrete implementation: the baking workflow scope is the subscene. So if you have multiple subscenes, this baking workflow will be run on each subscene bakers first in no particular order and baking system last. It also means that the bakers and baking system don't have access to information in the other subscenes. Back to our tutorial. To be honest, the baking systems are useful in more complex situations. I could not think of a good example that would be both simple and impossible with the bakers. So I will just log the number of waypoints in the path of each entity just to show you how a baking system is implemented and demonstrate what baking components are. Go back to your code editor and create a new tag component. That's literally just an ECS component with no data. Add it to your entity using the baker. And now create a new public partial class that extends the system base class. That will be our baking system. In the onUpdate method, use the entities for each to log the number of points in the path of each entity that have a waypoint buffer and the tag component. We will see in a future video how to implement that with the new idiomatic for each syntax. Now, to indicate that this is a baking system and not a normal system, we need to add a word system filter flag as an attribute of the system. Finally, we can add another debug in the baker to see that it is executed before the baking system. Go back to Unity and you will see in the console that the bakers were called before the baking system. If we look at the cube entity inspector, you will see it has the tag component. That's because we did not indicate that this tag component should be used only for the baking workflow. To do that, we need to go back to the code editor and add either the temporary baking component attribute or the baking component attribute. There is a difference between the two that I don't fully grasp yet, but once I do, you can expect a video about it. And if you get it, let me know in the comment below. And now, if we go back to Unity, you will see that everything works as expected and we no longer have the tag component on the baked entities. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned some stuff. If so, like and share with your friends and colleagues. As usual, if you have any question or feedback, let me know in the comments. See you next time!